Hi, Trisha. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Sean. Good to be here.
It's so good to see you. Thank you for taking the time.
Oh, my pleasure. So good to see you too.
It's been a lot of years, and I really enjoyed talking with Tom Kelly, your husband, last week. When Sean and I started talking about doing this podcast, you were sort of the two on the top of my list.
Oh, we are honored. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we'll jump right in here real quick. So the question that we asked Tom and the question that we're asking all the guests, we're kind of exploring this idea of a moment or an experience or something that motivated or made you realize that the programming that you were raised with or the environment or the social surroundings no longer served you or were true for you, or some kind of a situation where it put you on another path. What was the turning point where you essentially became a spiritual seeker? So do you recall an individual moment or a time period in your life where that happened?
You know, I feel very blessed. I'm one of these people that had an amazing childhood. Parents that loved each other, and they were both devout Catholics.
Okay.
And so there was a lot of love and devotion in the house. But I think when and it laid a great foundation. But about maybe puberty, I was going to say middle school, but started thinking for myself. And not everything added up. And I found myself resisting catechism classes and some of the rules and the thoughts around women, the absolutes. And so, it's funny, and Corinne can probably identify with this, and maybe you too, Sean. When I went into show business, I was so bored with school that I actually got out of high school a little bit early, went up to New York, got into a show and started traveling because I wanted to see the world. And it was there on the road performing that there's sense of loneliness and emptiness was there. And so I thought, well, maybe I should go back to Mass. I should go back to church. And I tried that once and it just didn't fill the space. And believe it or not, this guitarist in the show ended up saying to me, "You need to learn to meditate."
Wow.
That was it. You think now it's such a common thing, but back in the 70s, I was like, that's it. That's what I need.
Yeah.
And there it was. The trajectory changed. By the way, I ended up marrying the guy. Not because he said that.
Of course, the singer married the guitar player.
That's a tale old as time, man. So for you, it was, I'm assuming even when you were questioning the Catholic Church and we were kind of coming up with your own ideas, was it a rebellion from church, or was it more of realizing your ideals didn't align with the Catholic Church's ideals? Was there friction within the household when you kind of started to do your own thing?
And this is a credit to my mother's priest, because there was a bit of a rebellion, but not horrible, because there was a lot of respect in our family, and I would never hurt her or my dad. But I withdrew a little bit, and I'm the middle child, and I was typical middle child. The oldest has
all three of us. Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And so is Tom, by the way.
Wow.
So, I have found as a middle child, I get a lot more freedom because the oldest has her place, the youngest had her place, and I was free. And that's what I needed. I needed my independence. And so much so at a young age, I just wanted to do my own thing, travel my own path, have my own thoughts. Then my mother went to her priest. And do you know what he said to her? He said, some children need less mothering. Some need more independence. So it made her feel better that wasn't doing anything wrong. And she gave me that freedom to begin to think and feel. And when I did end up getting on the crazy yogic path and finding a guru, she was totally supportive because she could see that it fed my soul, and so was my dad.
That is incredible. Wow.
That's good to hear. That's a very open and very loving way of branching out from, you know, the familial religious dogma into your own space, and realizing that it's more about, you know, finding what you need versus, you know, shoving down your throat what is supposed to be. You know, that's very cool. I like that.
And they didn't go to fear. In
Yeah.
other words, if you don't do this, then, you know, wasn't it the burning in hell and any of that? And as a result of that, of their wisdom, there was never any wedge between us. I
Beautiful.
could talk to them about anything and talk to them about meditation, talk to them about what I was learning. And it brought us closer.
That's so beautiful. I've got a young student right now who's, 21 years old, and his family is Church of Christ. And that's very, very, you're from the South, right, Trisha? So
No, I
you're
live
not.
here.
Oh, okay.
I'm from Jersey.
Oh, you're Jersey girl.
South Jersey.
That makes more sense now, because I find New Yorkers, New Jersey, people in the Northeast they're culturally so much more open because there is all different kinds of religions and colors up there.
Mhm.
Like, on every corner, there's somebody from a different country. So I feel like Northeastern people or same with West Coast as well, are just very open.
Yes.
But anyway, my student came to me to learn how to meditate on his own. He's 21 years old. He'd left with some depression, left music school. And because the Church of Christ thing just isn't working for him. And but his parents did, let him, he's like, I'm going to learn how to meditate. And he's actually even becoming a meditation teacher now. But he struggled with whether to even tell his parents he doesn't feel comfortable in church anymore. And it's a hard thing for kids. And then, of course, India. I live in India part-time, and there fortunately are many families that are open, but there are also, unfortunately, many families that aren't open to their children marrying another religion, or it's both. So I think it's less, hopefully becoming more common, but back when we were young, I think less common. So beautiful to hear that was your path.
Yeah, I feel very blessed.
Okay, so you started meditating then in your 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then what was the next turning point?
So after I was we were in the show, and we got to Vegas, and show broke up, and I decided that what was available in performing for me in Vegas didn't align. And so
That's a great way
which is
to put
pretty
it.
easy, right?
To say it politely, yeah.
Yeah, to say it politely. And so I actually got into acting, and which took me to LA. I booked some work in Vegas, but then I made some connections that got me to LA. And but actually, I was doing a show in Vegas, and it was, musical, obviously. And so when I wasn't needed, I was standing behind the curtain ready for my cue. And someone had given me Man's Eternal Quest by Paramahansa Yogananda. And I opened the book. I was reading. I'll never forget. The red curtain was in front of me. I'm reading, and I went, this is it.
Mm.
This is it. And that, of course, next thing happened. I'm in LA. I've got work. And that's where, the Lake Shrine, the international headquarters of Self-Realization Fellowship, it is all there. And so I moved there. By that time, I was married to the musician. And we were living in Burbank, of all places. Mm-hmm. And I had a spiritual experience. We were at convocation, and we were meditating. There were thousands of people there, and we were meditating. And out of the clear blue, I hear this voice loud and clear, which was Yogananda's. He said, would you come and work for me?
Mm.
And I would. Now here, I remember I had 11 and a half years of education. The last couple of years had been in the entertainment business. I thought, what can I offer you? But I wanted to stand up and say, yes. But I had no idea. And next day, I happened to meet some of the nuns that, of course, worked. I didn't know this friend of mine happened to be a supervisor at the Mount Washington Mother Center. She said, I told her what happened. I said, I'm going to work here. She said, really? They don't have married ladies working there at that time. They only had nuns. And she said, really, you're going to work here? I told her what happened. And she got back to me and she said, I'm the supervisor of this department. Come in for a test. Come in for, the only thing I could do was type. So long story short, I got a job. And I was one of 2 married women that were working there. And I gave up my career. But do you know what? 2 points I want to make of that. First of all, isn't it interesting that Yogananda put it, would you come and work for me?
Mm-hmm.
He asked. It's about free will. But that free will was about to get tested again, because as soon as I got this call from Mount Washington, from the Mother Center, that I was accepted and that it was going to be giving a 6 months probation because they weren't sure, if the married thing was going to work. Literally, I hung up. I get another phone call. Back in the day, we didn't have cell phones, right? I pick it up. It's my agent. She said, and at that time, it was the 80s, General Hospital, or into the 70s, I can't remember, end of the 70s, General Hospital was hot. The main actress was leaving. I had been on a couple of auditions, and she said, the director wants you to come in for a screen test. And I went, whoa, this is really bad timing. So it brought me to a crossroads, and I chose my spiritual path. I didn't go on that the screen test.
That's big. That was like a little test from the universe.
It was, what do you really want?
Yeah.
That's huge. I mean, one of the things that kind of comes up a lot actually, I think almost consistently in each interview is there's a certain gravity or intuition or something that pulls on a string inside of you that either shows you to look in a direction or calls you to go in a different direction. And most of the time it's the illogical decision. It's the one that, socially or class-based decision wise wouldn't make sense. Why would you pass up possibly the biggest opportunity in acting to go, study yoga or, any kind of self-realization practice?
Serve a guru,
Yeah.
What motivated or moved you, if you can remember, in that time? How did you know that was the direction you should choose?
I just knew.
Yeah.
I just knew.
I mean, you'd have to say no to a career path that you'd been on for quite some time. That's like almost the universe saying, just you being very clear. Because if you know what I'm saying, it's like, it makes it more clear. It's almost like when someone comes to you with the opposite, it helps to make it even more clear. It's that contrast. I mean, you had to be very committed to say no to that and very clear.
The hardest phone call I think I had to make was I had to call my agent back after, because I said, oh, great. I think about it. I knew she would work very hard for me. And to tell her that I was going to take a minimum wage job, which at that time was $5 and some cents an hour, and walk away from a lucrative acting career, that was, and there was like silence on the other end. But that was another test, that, and telling my husband and my family that this is the way I was going to go, because like you said, Sean, there's a societal element, because everybody else would say, are you crazy?
Yeah, and that's definitely happened. I grew up in the music industry, and Corinne also was in the music industry for many years, and you know, it's for most people, it's like, oh, you had an opportunity to be an actor, or you had a opportunity to a path of self reflection, and studying with a guru. The thing is, like, it's really hard if you haven't been in any kind of an entertainment industry. It's hard to say how difficult it is to turn down that kind of an opportunity. I mean, for 10 years, for 10
Right?
every opportunity you could possibly seize was the right thing. And so much, I think for us, it became a dysfunction where we were always looking for the next opportunity instead of just being present in the moment. So I resonate with that phone call to your agent to say, no, I'm not going to take the audition of my life, my career, and I'm sorry to turn that down, even though I know you as an agent who only makes money if I take get the job. That's a hard position to be in. So, kudos for young you for making that decision. And did it feel, can you recall, did it feel complete after you did tell her and finally make that phone call afterwards? Did you feel good about that? Or were you like, oh shit, I just made the biggest mistake of my life?
I never regretted the decision.
Beautiful. Awesome.
And never questioned yourself.
No.
Wow.
No, it definitely came from my higher nature. And I really believe, that in the yogic path, we talk, one of the beliefs is reincarnation and karma. And I know beyond any shadow of a doubt that before I came down, this was written. I was told, this is what you'll do, and then this is what you'll do. And I know why I had to be an entertainer. And Corinne, maybe you can identify with this. I was naturally an introvert, artistic person, but an introvert. Getting on stage every night and then going into film and television, that gave me the poise, the confidence, the ability to do that I ended up doing, and that is end up being teaching meditation myself, yoga teaching, establishing the community. Without that, I would have been tripping over myself and just been in fear all the time. So it's just a beautiful, they just laid it out really beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I get that, because when I started teaching yoga, I was like, oh, this is just like singing. It's just like being in front of an audience singing. I'm just like, I'm here, is my audience, my students, and I'm talking, and I'm very comfortable because I've been on stage. So yeah, definitely lays the groundwork for that. That's so beautiful. So you started working in your 20s then at SRF in LA.
Yes.
I didn't know that. And then when did you become a yoga teacher?
Not until I didn't even practice hatha yoga. I practiced Raja yoga, the meditative and the philosophical, metaphysical aspect. And it wasn't until I had a couple of kids and my back was killing me that someone said, hey, you should do some hatha yoga, which did the trick. And I didn't become a yoga teacher. That wasn't even my idea. So again, it was the husband. Meanwhile, one husband leaves. 8 years later, Tom comes out of the monastery. We get married in 2000. And he said, let's study yoga. Let's become yoga teachers. That's in line with what we've done. So again, that wasn't even my idea, but didn't start teaching until, and even then it took some coaching. He went in first, and then maybe about 2001, 2002, I jumped in.
So you get this job with it was with SRF, and were you a typist? Were you what was your kind of admin?
I worked in correspondence department, and this was the beautiful thing. So I would type the letters going out, and those letters contained teachings and counseling, because that's how they did it back then, was through letters. So all day I was being inspired. The students would ask these questions, and I got to type the answers. And at first I was lousy, by the way. They had carbons And so when you made a mistake, you had to erase it. Oh my gosh.
Mess, big mess.
I can't believe that they kept me.
But as you're failing at a typist position, you're actually getting some of the most. That was a joke, by the way. I'm sure you.
I know it's pretty good.
You're actually getting to basically be this kind of bird's eye view, objective viewer of a student's question and the teacher's answers, and you get to kind of watch this dance between. And also, I'm assuming you were a student also at that time. So were you also interactive in that process where you got to ask questions too, or were you more from that position just observing that teaching and questioning?
I was observing it, but I was learning. I realized that there was training. It was spiritual training.
Yeah.
And I caught on pretty quick. And so after the 6 months, and they said, you're welcome to stay. I eventually, they began to train me as what they called a letter writer, so that I could answer some of the questions. And the beauty of that is, there were so many people, nuns, there were nuns, ladies that were waiting to be accepted into the ashram, and they were the people that I was working with, plus the nuns themselves. And some of them had very mundane, regular admin jobs. So I was so privileged that every day my consciousness was in Yogananda's teachings.
Wow.
I know, for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then they showed me something that I had no idea. I didn't realize that I was good at research. They discovered it because they said, well, look up this. So I was able to collate it pretty quickly. They said, you're good at research. And I went from correspondence to editorial department. And always again, in the teachings, really blessed. So that prepared me, that prepared my consciousness, I think, for that time where we established the Soul of Yoga and we became the mom and pop of this community.
So Soul of Yoga, Sean, and to our listeners, is a wonderful yoga studio where I met Tom and Trisha that they created in Encinitas, just north of San Diego. Gotcha. That's what she's talking about, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, very cool.
The yoga community. Oh, yeah, I jumped there, didn't I?
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right. And what, I use... It's so funny how people touch our lives and instances touch our lives, and we don't realize the ripple effect until we hear a story back. We just, we know, but it's wonderful to hear it. So, and correct me if I'm wrong, but as far as I know and what I tell people, Tom and Trisha did the smartest thing I've ever heard for a yoga studio is they started off in their home.
Yeah.
And so they had no overhead, and they waited until they were busting out of their home and they had to get a yoga studio before they moved. And then they started again in a small room, and then they didn't grow and I tell, there's so many people that want to start too big and have too many expenses, and they go under within the first year because of that. And you two are probably the only people I know that were so smart and started like that. Especially yoga studios are hard. They come and go so fast.
Very thin, bottom line, as you know. And by the way, I've been studying what you did since you moved to Nashville. What do you call your home? It's so beautiful.
It's the Ivy House. Mm-hmm.
The Ivy House. Yes. And I looked at that because I said to Tom when we moved to outside of Atlanta, I said, well, look, Corinne's already doing it, and you had such a great blueprint. I said, maybe we should do that.
Oh, guys, seriously, you have to come here when things open up and see our place. It's a beautiful old. It's actually a home from 1917. And it was actually built by the Ivies in 1917. It's on Ivy Street. That's why we call it the Ivy House. But also ivy grows towards the light. So our logo is like ivy growing towards the light. And it's a 3,000 square foot house on a full acre of land on a corner lot. So I've got a parking lot in the front, a parking lot in the back. So I've got parking for what, Sean, like 10 people minimum, 50.
Way more, yeah.
And then I've got I've got to put a garden in the front yard that's like a 40 foot by 40 foot garden. I've got a garden in the back. I've got, so it's organic foods. I mean, it just fell into, the universe, God just, it's like, I thought maybe one day in the back of my mind, I'd like a yoga studio that I lived at. I thought, and my friend one of my yoga students actually had this house. I saw this because we've had it 10 years now. So 20 years ago when she bought it,
Wow.
I walked in here to do the walkthrough, and her and her husband were going to buy it. And I said, oh my gosh, I'd love to live in a house like this, because outside, I'm in my bedroom right now. Outside my bedroom is a 450 square foot yoga studio with a fireplace that's just like no walls, all hardwood floor, all windows around the whole thing. And then you walk up the stairs and there's an attic that we've turned into a meditation studio. So, and then we had the bunkhouse for a while where people stayed, but then it got a little bit too much for us to have people staying here while we did. But I have my classes here. I can teach meditation here. Sean helped me move in here.
Yes,
So that's
yes.
how we met 10 years ago. He came to my yoga class and he got a newsletter. I think it was a year later, because I think I went to India or
Yes.
something. And he saw that I taught meditation. So he sends me this really cute email. He's like, I really want to learn meditation. I really need it, but I'm a starving musician and I've got a baby. I've got, my wife has her first child on the way. And I saw you do barter. Do you want me do any recording? I saw that you sing. And I said, well, I don't need any recording right now, but I'm sure I'll need something. And within a couple of weeks, I said, can you help me move in to this place? And so, and there's a lot more story that I won't go into detail on, but how it came about. My roommate who ended up buying the house, and yeah, it's a very special. And so we have a spare room with your and Tom's name on the door.
Awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So thank you for checking that out. I feel every day I want to kiss the ground that I live here, and during quarantine I meditate 2-3 hours a day. I'll do a Zoom class, I'll do a coaching call, then I'll go to the garden, and I just feel so blessed.
So you deserve it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, is that you and Tom's? Is that your intention in Atlanta? Are you guys?
Georgia, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're outside of Atlanta.
Okay, cool. Is that kind of, because you guys just recently moved to Georgia? Are you planning on kind of picking up from where you left off in California and doing a yoga studio, or what's your plans there?
I
didn't ask Tom this question. I only asked you this question. So,
well, we came. My two daughters. I have 2 daughters, 3 grandchildren, and both of my daughters are related to the film and television industry, which out in Atlanta is just booming.
Right.
It's amazing. And you can buy a house here. I mean, they weren't thriving in North County, San Diego. It's just the overhead is for a young family, just too much. So they came. Shauna had a movie here. Serena saw it. They both moved out. They're both doing really well. They own their own homes. They're working beautifully. And so I used to come out, because I'm pretty attached to my girls and my grands. I used to come out every other month and spend some time. And I saw the home prices 3 years ago. So we ended up investing in a home that we're living in now, and just loving the area. And having been born, and you didn't ask me this question, but I just have to say that coming from Southern California, where it's really dry and you worry about water and rain, Corinne, you probably feel this way too. And then you come to a place that has trees and lakes and rivers and brooks, and for me, a Jersey girl, that's where I grew up, that kind of greenery and lushness. So it just feels very alive here with some mild seasons. We came with the thought of staying 6 months. We rented our home out in Encinitas, and we said, we're just going to stay here for 6 months. Well, we've been here a year and plus, and we've sold our home in Encinitas, so cut those ties. So Soul of Yoga has been purchased, and we own 15% of it. We're still very, very close to the new owner, and he's just brilliant, Ryan Stanley. And he asked us recently, because of COVID, they've expanded their online offerings, including the institute. They call it the Soul of Yoga Institute, where we teach yoga teacher training and that sort of thing, which you have to do to pay the bills. Is just going through the roof. It's supporting the yoga studio. So he asked us, he said, would you work with us again and do some online things. So we are getting to that point now where we'll be working more. But Tom is 70,
Hmm.
and I'm a couple years younger. And so you know, it takes a lot more energy that you have in 70 and 66 to own your own yoga
Yeah.
studio.
Yeah, that's why we laughed when
Yeah.
Trisha and I knew why we laughed.
You know,
Yeah. Oh,
so
well, and that's the thing is, I'm sure you guys are very well versed in the listening practice of meditation, and I'm sure the right thing will come to you at the right moment. And that's what's been interesting about this year is, so you guys were already kind of had made that move before quarantine, so now it's in this pandemic and this whole year has been kind of a blessing and a curse depending on what you put your focus on, of course. And you've had family time. I mean, that's kind of the biggest gift is you've been able to spend, I'm sure, a lot more time with family and your grandkids, and the rest will develop and blossom as it needs to, I'm sure. And I'm hoping that's a lesson that kind of starts to permeate our culture more than just these small little cultures that we exist. This listen, pay attention, and then move through life with intention instead of just grabbing on for dear life and letting life drag you through, the muck of society and whatnot. So,
yeah.
excited for you guys to, be on that adventure.
There was another adventure that I had gotten on before we came here. We were always telling people when we opened the Soul of Yoga, it was a spiritual community. It is a spiritual community. But I couldn't teach, Tom and I couldn't teach the kind of meditation, Kriya Yoga that we practice because you take a vow not to. It is diksha. It is it's part of the guru disciple relationship. So it's not something you can get online. It's something you have to commit to. So for a long time, we were telling our students, our community, meditate, but we couldn't teach them how we did it. And I couldn't find something that really resonated with me, something powerful, until I came across a mystic clairvoyant by the name of Barbara Martin, who wrote a book called Change Your Aura, Change Your Life. And I got in touch with Barbara and Dimitri, her co-writer and spiritual director of Spiritual Arts Institute. And I talked to them, read the book, and I said, I started practicing the technique. And I said, this is powerful. It's meditation with divine light.
Okay.
So in order to learn it, I became a student of this metaphysical school. It's a modern day mystery school.
It's nice.
The teachings are powerful. And anyway, one thing led to another. I did begin to teach it at the Soul. There were quite a few people interested. Barbara and Dimitri moved to Encinitas from LA, opened up a center, a physical space, because they had always been virtual.
Okay.
Ahead of the time. So then they had a physical space, a virtual, and I left the Soul of Yoga to help them establish the Institute in Encinitas, which happened to be right across the street from the Soul of Yoga.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I eventually became a healer, a direct divine light healer, and now I teach meditation as well. So all that can be done virtually. So I actually haven't had a lot of downtime since COVID started. People talk about having 2-3 hour meditations and sitting in their garden, and I'm like, wow, that sounds nice. Because when I moved here, I started working virtually, and nothing changed.
Well, I think you have those times in your life. Yeah, I certainly have had stints where I've worked a lot.
Yeah.
And this time for me, I knew was not that. So, but I'm so happy to hear that you've been available for people for that support, because so many people need that support right now. There's, people are feeling isolated, and, our community that we know that's been doing the spiritual work for the most part is doing quite well because we have the tools, but there are a huge amount of people that do not have the tools. And it's one of the reasons why we're doing the podcast, it's just to help support people. I loved autobiographies growing up. I love hearing people's stories and sort of what happened to them and what helped them. And
Too.
yeah, and so I feel like just sharing stories, sharing these spiritual turning points, and then how our life is affected by these turning points, and because the feeling that I'm getting from you, and also from knowing you and Tom, but hearing more of your story, is that when you devote yourself to a practice, to, in your case, the guru, the life really is quite smooth. Like that was going to be a question for you, actually, is because you did go through a divorce and you did have children. So do you mind sharing like how your spiritual practice has helped you through that difficult time?
Yes, because without it, it would have been 100 times harder.
Yeah.
So I had been on the spiritual path probably 12 or 13 years before the split happened. And quite frankly, another thing that happened was that I was warned. I was spiritually warned that my husband was going to leave. And I went into a panic. I thought, I'm going to do everything I can, because we had hit a bumpy road. I was deeply committed to the spiritual. He had decided that he was not. Let's just put it that way. And anyway, he ended up meeting and falling in love with his soulmate. And decided that that was the love of his life, and left. And I don't think I moved or slept or ate or anything for 3 full days. It was like a train hit me, but I was still alive. It was that devastating.
Mm-hmm.
It shocked me. Even though I had spiritually been warned, I knew. So it didn't lessen the shock, because all of a sudden, because at that time I was a stay-at-home mom, I didn't really have an income. We had moved from California to Florida. So what I ended up having is I ended up getting my job back in Mount Washington at the Self-Realization International headquarters. And I had to move my girls from Florida, which are places they really loved. We lived in a small beach town, back to the city. It's so hard, so hard. And if it wasn't for my meditation practice and the community, because I went back to working with the nuns and they were so supportive. Yogananda said, environment is stronger than willpower.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's the
I have
quote of
found
the night.
the quote of the decade. Because I had my own spiritual practice, but without that environment, without that support, I just don't know. Now, my children, my girls were 11 and 8. They didn't have that support. They had me, but I had just been thrown into the role of living below the poverty line with 2 daughters. I felt like a refugee. We had nothing.
Wow.
It was so hard. It was so hard on them. It was so hard on me. So we survived. But I made mistakes. Lots of mistakes that I wish I hadn't. But I was young. I was scared. But again, the spiritual practice kept me connected to the divine, which kept me connected to now this, now that, learn to forgive, just everything. But it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
It was the hardest time I ever went through in my life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I have not been through that, but I can imagine what that would be like, having 3 kids, and I can.
Two.
Well, I'm sorry, I have 3 kids, so
Yeah. It's about you. I thought you were talking about me.
I could imagine what that would be like to, be on your own. And, my wife and I, we've been together for, 18 years, and we've had
Since they were 14 years old.
You're 14. So, well, that's almost 20 years now, damn it. So, it's one of those things where we've had those rough patches, and one of our biggest core values as a family is, having, somebody at home present, not having daycare as much as possible. And we recognize how important it is to create the most secure environment possible is to have, a strong support system. And, in that situation, I can imagine moving cross country, like you said, in below the poverty line, not having, huge support outside of your spiritual community. If you didn't have that, man, you'd be in pure survival mode even more so, right? Not having anything to trust, not having anything to guide, and you're just, kind of flailing in the wind. So the fact that you had that is huge, man. And, I commend you for going through that, because I think that happens too much in our culture where, you can be a single parent. You can do it. You wouldn't wish that on anybody, would you? I imagine not.
It was hard on me, but it was devastating for my daughters.
Yeah.
Devastating. And that was the hardest part, is watching them suffer.
Mm.
And everything suffers, right? Their relationship with men, trust,
Yeah.
abandonment issues. I mean, and on and on. Then they go to a new school and there's cliques. It was so painful. But, it
Somehow you get through it.
You get through it, and it gives you, and when you do, your faith and your trust are stronger than ever.
And that's another thread that we've been finding.
Yeah. Faith, trust,
Yeah.
spiritual faith. It's one of those things that it's almost like it's a strange paradox, the relationship with faith, because you're almost constantly tested by faith. It's almost like you're constantly tested, but it's not faith that's testing you. It seems like there's always something in your field of view as you're walking the path that's trying to convince you not to have faith, or trying to convince you not to trust. And you're always weighing and second guessing that. And it's funny, I don't remember, it's all kind of blurring together, whether it was a conversation Corinne and I, or one of the podcasts where, it's like, I know to trust. I know to listen. I know that always works out. There's been too many times, too many serendipities, too many, circumstances where trust was tested and proved itself time and time again. And yet I will constantly question that command, that voice, or that, whatever that spiritual space is that's calling me to do something. And I'm always, are you sure? And and what's interesting, and what I think, when it's the higher self, or whatever your dialogue is for that, is when it doesn't call you out. It's very patient with you. It'll tell you to do something. It'll guide you. You don't listen 10, 15 times, and it'll always bring you the same message, right? It's always patient. It's always kind. It's always accepting. It's always, well, this is for you to take. This is for you to walk. And you don't always have to, but it's way better, and you suffer way less if you listen in that first space and just go with the gravity.
That's so true. It's so true, and well put. And I notice there's another aspect of faith, and I want to mention this for anybody that's listening, because through the important parts of my time, my life, the really hard ones and the really great ones, I've had the kind of connection that I guess I brought in from a previous life, where I could get direct or very powerful indirect guidance. But sometimes for people around me, including my first husband, when he would see what my relationship with the divine was like, and he compared it to what he was getting from meditation, he figured, why should I bother? I'm not getting anything. His relationship, his experience in meditation was different than mine. I also have a teacher, a friend, very, very powerful. So in other words, let's just put it this way. To anybody listening, never compare yourself with another person.
Yeah.
Never try, just because they might have a little clairvoyance or a little clairaudience or anything like that, that does not mean they are further along in the path. It does not mean that they're any closer to God than you are. Tom tells a very powerful story where he was going through, I don't know if he told you the story, but when he was a young postulant, it's a great story. He was a young postulant, and this brother monk who had been there a very long time that everyone respected, he was just a beautiful, wise, in touch man, and he would correct them. And Tom would get ignored. And finally he went to this brother and he said, "Why don't you ever correct me? Talk to me. I don't care if you yell at me. You don't say anything to me." And this very wise monk knew what kind of training Tom needed. And he said, "You, my son, get it by not getting it." That was Tom's training, was to be ignored, because he was raised as this kind of spoiled little rich kid. And this very wise monk knew, you need to be humbled.
Wow.
So never, ever compare yourself, because whatever you are going through is what you need.
Yeah.
And it's going to take you home.
Yeah.
Man, that is awesome. Thank you very much for putting it that way, because that is a mechanism of the ego to compare, to contrast, and it will, ultimately, if you look for ways other people are more spiritually advanced than you, you're going to see them. You're going to find that. That's what's going to come to your field of view. But if you accept that it's not about that, experience, it's not about comparing yourself, it's not about, wow, they've been meditating for 40 years, they must be further along. Maybe, who knows? And how could you judge that? And it's not for any of us to judge in the first place. And like you said, it's, we have, there's a special recipe that spirit, God, life has for us. And it comes in very unique ways. And it's almost maddening. When you said that, where he said, you get it by not getting it, like, that's, you feel that resonates your core, and that drives you crazy, right? But all of those mechanisms, it deprograms the things that don't serve you. Ultimately, that kind of wisdom, it really strips you of all the things that don't serve you. And the idea is to constantly put yourself in experiences of being humbled, of being, in awe, and finding faith, and just staying in the gratitude of your own journey, of your own experience. And that's beautiful, man. I thank you very much for making that point, because that's very important, And sorry, I'm rambling because I had some yerba mate and it's caffeinating me. I'm going nuts. But it's funny how, spiritual communities can devolve to such competition or such ego resistance, because I'm guilty of this hundreds, thousands. I'm sure Corinne could tell you a million stories of watching this unfold for me, as a young seeker, and it ultimately, it doesn't serve anybody in any community to have that that holier than thou, or that lesser than thou kind of attitude. You have to be humble and focused on your walk, your journey, and be inspired by as many things that inspire you, and go towards that let those as inspirations be gravities that pull you along, through that journey, instead of, stumbling behind somebody else.
Go ahead, Trisha. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, if you compare yourself, you mentioned the ego, Sean. If you compare yourself to someone else, the ego would do what I was saying before, to someone to say, well, why should I bother?
Yes.
The ego will give up, because it's too much trouble to have faith.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's too much trouble, too much work to have trust.
It is a lot of work, and it's constant. And that's why, I think that's why the meditation practice is so important, because it keeps you in that state of listening, of questioning, of, of observing, and really taking that experience in. And that's what's different about, patterns and habits that are programs, and practices that are intentional. Meditation practice that's intentional. Every day you do this, not habitually, just because it's the thing to do, but because that's what keeps you in the present moment of your own journey.
And that's what keeps your meditation fresh. And, normally, in other words, why am I doing this? Why am I sitting down morning and evening? That has to be, it's just like a marriage, right? You have to renew it. It's a relationship, but this relationship is with God. And, normally, under normal circumstances, especially for years, I've been on the spiritual path now over 40 years. So normally, for years, I would not talk about my experiences. I talk about the experience of, so there was another monk. I actually had a spiritual experience at the SRF Lake Shrine in Pasadena, in Pacific Palisades, that was obvious to everybody around me. And it disrupted the meditation. And the monk who was leading the meditation said to me later, he said, "What happened?" And I told him, and he said, "No, that's not what happened. You fell asleep." And I was like, "Whoa, no, that's not what happened." So anyway, I did some research. I figured out what happened. I went to this other monk and I said, "I didn't fall asleep. This is where I found it in this scripture." And do you know what he said to me? This is where it got into. Here was the lesson. Here's another lesson along that. He said to me, "Never tell anyone about this experience." He said, "They will forgive you your flaws, but they will never forgive you your goodness."
Ooh.
Because we want people to be like,
Yeah, in transcendental meditation, they used to call it bliss envy.
Mm.
There's so many different reasons not to talk about things. People don't, because you can't ever convey what happened to you anyway. Even though I am writing a book about
See that?
my turning points.
But there's a time and place for everything.
Yes,
Like I said, now it feels safe. Maybe it will help. But that's why I had to make that point is, don't listen to me and think that this is the way your life should look.
Yes. Yeah. Well, sorry, I had to pause. That hit me. They will forgive you your flaws, but not your goodness. I mean, that hit me. That hit me really hard. I had to take a moment. Normally, I would have a lot to say about that, but that struck me, deeply because it feels like when you tried to express. I mean, you had a divine experience. It was true for you.
It was life-changing.
And when you tried to express that or explain that to other people, it's almost like you were bringing that situation down, or you were almost lessening it by trying to articulate it. I mean, and that's kind of somewhat, I guess that's a metaphor for God. I mean, for the divine. I mean, we use these words that doesn't really complete. You say God, but it doesn't really complete the wholeness. We oftentimes dumb down experiences by trying to articulate them, and that was kind of hitting me when you said that. And but the forgive you of your goodness it's like, wow. I mean, that's a huge moment of clarity and learning, then to know your truth and hold it pure without validation, without anything from anybody outside. That's just feels a lot.
Okay,
so now will you share it with us?
What happened? Oh, wow.
No pressure.
Okay, this will bring us around to the beginning, and I'll make it very brief. Being raised Catholic, you die, and the story is it's either heaven or hell. So even though I had a lot of devotion and I thought I had faith in God, I didn't realize that I had an unconscious fear of death. Because what if God was in a bad mood the day I died? I mean, it sounds absurd, but that's how my child's mind figured it out. So in this meditation, the breath was sucked out of my lungs, and that's why everybody knew, I made this loud noise, lost the breath, and I fell over on this tiny little woman sitting next to me, and I was not breathing. And so but I could hear, just like they say, when you die, you can hear. I could hear someone say, "Is there a doctor in the house?" My husband was sitting next to me. They took me, they laid me down. There was a doctor. They tried working on me, and someone had the idea of working the acupuncture points. And little by little, I came back. Well, I had the experience of going down the tunnel and going through the light, and they brought me back. And then they had to walk me around the lake a little bit because my life force had withdrawn from the limbs and from the nerves. And so what that did for me, and that's why the monk said to me, "What happened to you?" And he said, "You fell asleep." He thought I snored or something. I knew I had not, because it took me halfway around the lake. I mean, this is a huge 1-acre lake to get the life force back through my body. But it was a game changer, because not only from that point on, I could meditate more deeply because I was no longer afraid of God. The biggest thing that I was afraid of was death. And I experienced conscious death. And the reason I knew that is because what came into my lap the day after, Life After Life, that book by Moody that came out in the 70s about people's experience. He did studies, Dr. Moody did studies on people who had near-death experiences. In other words, they died and they came back. And this book is about what they experienced as they died. That's what I experienced. So that's when I went to this other monk that I had gotten a better friendship with. And I said, "I died." And that's when he gave that great line. But from that day for a long time, I just wanted to go. I wanted to die because it was so beautiful. Everything about it was so freeing. This sounds really crazy, but from then time I would drive. We went and did a trip. Tom was doing some public speaking in Detroit, and they have these beautiful old graveyards. I remember they drove by, and I was like, someday it's going to be my turn.
Yeah.
Now I've gotten past that, and I realize I have a reason to be here, and I'm grateful to be here. But God knew, the Holy Ones knew, Yogananda knew that I needed that. I needed to drop that fear. And the only way for me to drop that fear was to walk through it. So I invite you, everybody who's listening, what you fear the most. When they say Job in the Bible, he said, "What I feared the most has come upon me." If going through something you fear the most, this is your time for freedom.
Beautiful.
That hit me hard. You just hit me really hard because I fell apart last week, and Patty asked me, "What are you afraid of?" And you just basically the next week said, "Do what you're afraid of, find that fear, and go towards that fear." I mean, that is huge, man, and that doesn't sound crazy at all. It's different, talking about death, welcoming it because you're not afraid of it versus hastening your death because you're fed up with life or you can't. Those are two different things. I mean, and you're very nonchalant about either one. Well, I'll stay here, I'll go, whatever is my calling, I'll go freely. I mean, that's what it feels like on this end of it. And that is something that I think is a beautiful way to go, is to welcome that next adventure, and you've had a taste of that next adventure, then the other world, the world of God, and being able to bring that back and kind of being a light for that, next adventure is huge, man.
It's beautiful over there.
Mm-hmm. What a great sharing, Trisha. Thank you so much. What a very, very beautiful sharing.
Oh, thank you. And you write that book, all right?
I'm working on it. It's a process for sure. It's a long process, but a joyful process for sure. It's about the spiritual, not just the memoirs, because who cares about my life, but I have had a lot of spiritual turning points. I just mean, who would care about my story other than me?
I think, well, like you said, I love autobiographies. I love reading about especially women. We haven't even gotten into that, but it's time for the women's story and the women's strength, and
Absolutely.
yeah, learn from one another, and men too.
Well, we've had our time, and we have it's interesting. Corinne knows where I stand. I'm very middle of the road between male and feminine energies. I don't.
He's very well balanced.
I'm very well balanced, and I think it's interesting to watch this change, because I see the what's the word, dysfunctional masculinity being challenged right now, and it's kind of funny to watch from somebody who's done a lot of work to maintain that balance. Watching that dysfunction manifest as fear and just possessiveness and over aggression. It isn't the way, and it isn't going to serve us as a community. You have to bring both those energies together. When they're in union, it's fantastic. And so I look forward. I'm thankful to be a part of a generation that gets to watch, where we are and then where we can go by bringing that feminine energy in and welcoming that, instead of just being terrified of it, which I see so often, and I don't get it, but.
Well, thank you for helping to co-create that equanimity.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and it's interesting. I grew up in the Midwest, and my family was raised we did not, I mean, there are certain roles, of course, generationally, but I was raised and taught, there's equanimity in our relationship. There's not dominant male. There's not imbalance in any way in our relationship. And, I think we've done a lot to maintain that. And I want to see that more in the world, because it's way, way healthier. It's way healthier.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that's a wrap.
Yeah, that's a place to stop. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you for going into some of those deeper experiences, and we could talk probably for another 2 hours, and we'll have to have both you and Tom back, maybe as a duo at one point. That would be kind of fun.
That would be fun.
So, but yeah, thank you again very much.
No, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.